It was an ordinary evening in the small town, but the discovery of a blood-soaked letter was anything but ordinary. The supermarket was eerily quiet as the evening shift wound down, the cold, flickering lights casting long shadows over the linoleum floors. Sarah, a young woman working late that night, walked down the freezer aisle when something caught her eye. A red smear on the floor, leading toward a corner behind the display. As she approached, her heart skipped a beat. It wasn't a spill. It was blood. Her fingers trembled as she bent down to pick up the letter. Her breath caught in her throat as she read the hastily scrawled words. "You saw everything. You are next." A chill ran through her. Panic surged. She couldn't move, her feet stuck in place as the reality of the situation began to set in. She was the last person to see him alive, but she couldn't remember the night. The events leading to his death were a blur. What had she witnessed? Who would want her dead too? Her heart raced as she stood frozen in place. The letter, damp with blood, felt like a heavy weight in her hands. A sharp ringing noise echoed in her mind, the sounds of sirens, and her panicked breath melding into a blur. "Who would want me dead?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. It didn't make sense. She didn't remember anything from the night before. She tried desperately to piece together the fragments of her memory. The last thing she could recall was walking through the aisle, a customer mumbling something as they passed her. The lights flickered, the cold air from the freezer pressing against her skin. It felt like hours had passed since she found the letter, yet the whole supermarket remained still, empty, silent. A voice shattered the silence. "Sarah? You all right?" It was Kyle, her co-worker. She didn't answer right away, still caught in the surreal horror of the moment. Kyle approached, his voice soft and concerned. "Sarah, what's wrong?" His eyes darted down to the bloodstain. "What happened here?" Sarah finally blinked, trying to focus. "I don't remember," she whispered. "I just found this. And this blood." Kyle knelt down to examine the letter, his expression tightening. "I think we need to get out of here," he said quietly, glancing around nervously. Something about the way he said it made Sarah shiver. She couldn't help but feel like there was more to this than he was letting on. Kyle's words didn't sit right with Sarah. There was something off about his sudden caution. "What do you mean, get out of here? Shouldn't we call the police?" she asked, her voice trembling. But Kyle was already looking toward the exit, his eyes darting nervously. "Not yet. We should wait. The place is still open. Someone could see us. They'll think we're involved if we make a scene." Sarah frowned. His tone didn't sound reassuring. It sounded like someone trying to hide something. "Kyle, you're scaring me." Her words hung heavy in the air as she clutched the letter tighter. The tension between them thickened. She could feel the weight of something dark in the space between them. A noise from the back of the store interrupted the tense moment. A faint sound, almost like footsteps, echoing from the storage room. Sarah's heart pounded. She wasn't alone. Kyle's expression shifted instantly. "Stay here," he whispered urgently. Before she could respond, he was already moving toward the back room. The air around Sarah seemed to grow colder, her pulse racing. The footsteps grew louder. A cold dread washed over her as she took a step forward. Something told her that this wasn't just a robbery. The silence that followed felt too deep. Sarah stood, heart pounding, the letter still clenched in her hand, her mind racing. Whatever had happened, she was now tangled in a nightmare she didn't understand. Sarah stood there in the middle of the aisle, clutching the letter in her trembling hands. She could hear Kyle moving behind her, his voice barely audible as he spoke to someone over the phone. "Yeah, I know, but we need to be careful. It's too risky right now." He paused, glancing at Sarah with a mix of concern and urgency. He didn't know what to say. Neither of them did. They had no idea who could have written that letter or why they were being targeted. Sarah's mind raced. She needed answers. But the fear gnawing at her was almost paralyzing. She could feel someone watching her, someone in the shadows. She turned slowly, but there was nothing. Only empty aisles. But that's when she heard it again, footsteps. faint, but unmistakable. They were following her. Her breathing quickened. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was right behind her. Sarah quickly turned, scanning the dimly lit aisles. The footsteps seemed to pause, as if whoever was following her was waiting for her next move. "Kyle," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Kyle didn't answer. He was too far away, lost in conversation on the phone, his focus elsewhere. Sarah's grip on the letter tightened. She knew she had to act fast, but she didn't know where to go. The store was a maze, and she felt trapped in the very place that had once been so familiar. Her eyes darted from aisle to aisle, looking for a way out. But there was no exit. Not without confronting whatever was lurking in the shadows. The footsteps began again, closer now, as though someone was walking right behind her. The footsteps were getting louder. Sarah spun around to face the sound, but no one was there. Just the distant hum of the refrigerator units, the flickering lights above, and the silence that seemed to stretch for an eternity. She could feel her heartbeat in her throat as she turned to run. But as she darted down the aisle, she froze. There, standing at the end of the aisle, was a figure. A shadow, tall and unnervingly still. The figure's face was hidden, but Sarah could feel the presence of something dark, something dangerous. Her breath caught in her chest. Was it him? Was it the person who wrote the letter? The figure didn't move. It was as if it was waiting for her to make the next move. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Sarah's body refused to move. She couldn't tear her eyes away from the figure, her mind racing. Was it a trick of the light? A hallucination? No. It was real. She could feel the weight of its gaze, and it made her skin crawl. "Kyle," she called, her voice hoarse and panicked. No answer. Her feet were rooted to the ground. She tried to scream again, but the words caught in her throat. The figure took a step forward. Slowly, methodically. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but fear paralyzed her. She was trapped. No escape. No one around to help. The footsteps behind her had stopped, but the shadow in front of her kept moving, closing the distance. Her heart pounded in her ears. Every muscle in her body tensed, as if waiting for the moment when she would have to face whatever was coming. Sarah's fight or flight instincts finally kicked in. She didn't know how she did it, but suddenly she was running. Her feet pounding against the cold tiles, the sound of her breath ragged and frantic as she sprinted down the aisle. She didn't look back, not even once. She knew if she did, it would be over. She burst through the swinging doors of the stockroom and slammed them shut behind her. She leaned against the door, gasping for breath, trying to calm her racing heart. But the terror didn't stop. Her hands still shook violently as she looked around. The stockroom was dark, filled with towering shelves of products and boxes, all too silent. She felt like a cornered animal, her every sense on high alert. The letter in her hand was still drenched in blood, but she could still hear the faint echo of footsteps, coming from somewhere far behind her. The stockroom was cold, and the silence around Sarah felt suffocating. She pressed her back against the door, her breath shallow as her mind raced. What had just happened? Who was that figure? Was it the same person who had left the letter, or someone else entirely? She couldn't think straight. Her head was spinning. The room seemed to close in around her as she fumbled with the blood-stained letter in her hand. The words on the page blurred, but she kept reading them over and over again. "You saw everything. You are next." That was the last thing Jake had written before he disappeared. Had it really been him? Her thoughts drifted to the memories of their last encounter. Jake had been acting strange, distant. She couldn't put the pieces together. Had he been the target, or was he the one who was playing a game all along? The door behind her creaked as someone tried to push it open, and panic surged in her chest. Her heart raced as she turned to face the door, her body frozen in place. The creak of the door was followed by another, more distinct sound, footsteps. They were close, too close. Her breath caught in her throat as she crouched behind a stack of boxes, clutching the letter tightly to her chest. The footsteps stopped just outside the stockroom, and she could hear someone breathing, slow and deliberate. Sarah's heart was pounding in her ears, the silence unbearable. Was it Kyle? She couldn't be sure. After all, she hadn't seen him in what felt like hours. She waited, counting the seconds, wondering if she was imagining it. Then, the unmistakable sound of the door handle turning broke the stillness. She squeezed her eyes shut, her body tense, waiting for the moment when the intruder would make their move. The door creaked open just enough for a figure to slip inside. Sarah's breath hitched as the door slowly closed behind them. She watched from her hiding spot, her hands trembling as the figure stepped further into the stockroom. She couldn't make out their face, but their posture was rigid and purposeful. It's not Kyle, she realized with a jolt of dread. The figure moved slowly, deliberately, checking each corner of the room. Sarah could feel her heart pounding in her chest, her body desperate to stay silent. The figure passed just inches from her hiding spot, their shadow casting a long menacing shape on the wall. Time seemed to slow down as she fought to keep her breathing quiet. Her thoughts raced. Who is this person? What do they want from me? The figure stopped, their head turning as if sensing her presence. Sarah held her breath, praying they wouldn't see her. The figure's head turned toward her hiding spot, their eyes narrowing as if they were aware of her presence. Sarah's blood ran cold. She froze, willing herself to be invisible. The figure stepped closer, slowly and methodically, until they were standing directly in front of the stack of boxes where Sarah crouched. Her body went stiff as the figure knelt down, their breath now audible in the heavy silence. "I know you're here," the figure said, their voice low and gravelly. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. How could they know? She remained still, barely daring to breathe, her mind racing. The figure stood up and took a step back, their gaze still fixed on her hiding place. Sarah's thoughts were jumbled, but one thing was clear: she wasn't safe. The figure was playing with her, like a cat toying with a mouse. She needed to get out of there. With a sudden burst of adrenaline, Sarah bolted from her hiding place, sprinting toward the back door of the stockroom. The figure was quick to react, following her with swift, measured steps. She didn't dare look back, her feet pounding against the cold concrete floor. The door was close now, just a few more feet, and she could escape. But as her hand reached for the handle, she felt a cold grip on her shoulder. She gasped and twisted in the figure's grasp, but they yanked her back into the room, slamming her against the wall. Sarah struggled to breathe, the wind knocked out of her as the figure loomed over her. "You can't run from me," the figure whispered, their voice a low, menacing growl. Fear gripped her chest, but a surge of defiance pushed her to fight back. She had to survive. Sarah struggled beneath the figure's grip, her breath ragged as she fought to free herself. She could feel the cold of the stockroom walls against her back, the figure's hands tightening on her shoulders. With a swift motion, she twisted her body, trying to break free. But the figure wasn't letting go. "Who are you?" Sarah managed to gasp, her voice trembling with fear and fury. The figure remained silent, their breath heavy and steady. Sarah's mind raced, the terror threatening to consume her, but somewhere deep inside, something sparked, a burning need to survive. She couldn't let herself be taken again. With every ounce of strength she had left, Sarah brought her knee up sharply, making contact with the figure's side. The figure staggered back, loosening their grip. For the first time, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. She turned and dashed toward the door again, her pulse pounding in her ears. Sarah's heart raced as she sprinted toward the back door, but the figure wasn't far behind. She could hear their footsteps gaining on her, each step echoing louder in the cold, empty room. She reached for the door handle, her hand shaking, but just as her fingers brushed it, she was yanked backward again. Her body slammed into the floor with a thud. She gasped in pain, scrambling to push herself up. But the figure was already on top of her, grabbing her by the arms and holding her down. "You won't get away that easily," they hissed. Sarah kicked her legs, her chest heaving with panic, her mind screaming for a way out. The door was so close, she could almost feel the cool air outside. The figure's grip tightened, pulling her back further into the stockroom, away from her only chance at escape. Sarah's vision blurred with adrenaline as the figure pulled her further back, closer to the shelves. She kicked and fought, trying to break free. "Let me go," she screamed, but the figure remained unfazed. She could hear their breathing, slow and steady, like they were enjoying the moment. "No, I can't let this happen," Sarah thought, her heart pounding in her chest. The figure's hand reached for something in their pocket. It was a small metallic object, a knife. The blade caught the dim light, glinting menacingly. Sarah's blood ran cold. She couldn't let them get any closer. With a surge of panic-fueled strength, she lashed out with her foot, kicking the knife out of their hand. It clattered across the floor, and the figure's grip loosened just enough for Sarah to break free. She scrambled to her feet, her heart racing as she ran, desperate to get away before the figure could recover. The knife slid across the floor, just out of reach as Sarah dashed toward the door again. Her legs burned from the exertion, but she couldn't stop now. The door was just inches away, the cold air beyond so close she could taste it. But as her hand reached for the handle once more, she heard a grunt behind her. The figure wasn't finished yet. Sarah's pulse raced as she turned around just in time to see the figure lunge toward her, their hand grabbing her ankle. She screamed, twisting violently, trying to free herself from their grip. The figure yanked harder, pulling her back again. "You're not going anywhere," they snarled. Panic surged through Sarah, and she dug her nails into the floor, trying to crawl forward, her muscles screaming. She had to escape. She couldn't let them drag her back. With a final desperate move, she kicked her other foot toward the figure's chest, knocking them off balance just long enough to slip free. With one final burst of energy, Sarah yanked open the door and sprinted into the parking lot, the cold night air hitting her like a slap in the face. She didn't stop to look back. The parking lot was empty, the only sound the rapid thumping of her heart. She needed to get as far away as possible. Her legs burned with exhaustion, but she forced herself to keep running. She couldn't afford to slow down. But as she reached the edge of the lot, her breath caught in her throat. There, standing near the gate, was Kyle. His face was grim, his body tense as he watched her approach. "Sarah, you need to listen to me," he said, his voice low and strained. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She had so many questions. Was he part of this? Had he been helping the figure? Her breath caught in her chest as she took a cautious step toward him. Sarah stood there in the parking lot, her body trembling from the adrenaline and exhaustion. Kyle remained standing by the gate, his posture tense, his eyes locked onto hers. "What do you want from me, Kyle?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper, the words tinged with fear and suspicion. Kyle's face remained unreadable, but the look in his eyes seemed conflicted, as though he were struggling with something. "I'm not part of this, Sarah," he said, his voice low. "But I've been trying to protect you. The person after you. They're closer than you think." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. Was Kyle telling the truth? Was he trying to help her, or was he just another piece of the puzzle, playing a dangerous game? The silence between them stretched, broken only by the sound of Sarah's breath, each inhale sharp and quick. She had no choice now. She had to trust him, or risk losing everything. The air felt heavy as Kyle stepped forward, his eyes darting nervously toward the dark road behind them. "You need to come with me," he urged, his voice quiet but insistent. "We're not safe here." Sarah felt a pang of uncertainty, but the urgency in Kyle's tone made her hesitate. She looked around, her eyes scanning the empty parking lot. The distant hum of the city, a reminder that she wasn't truly alone. The fear in her chest grew. Was it him? Was he the one after her? Kyle caught her hesitation and added, "I'm not lying, Sarah. Please just trust me. I'll explain everything later, I swear." His pleading voice made Sarah's resolve falter. She needed to make a choice. Trust him and risk being led into danger, or walk away and risk facing the person who had been hunting her. After a long moment, she finally nodded, too exhausted to argue anymore. They moved quickly, their footsteps echoing in the stillness of the night. Kyle led her through the alley behind the parking lot, his pace quickening as he glanced over his shoulder every few steps. Sarah followed, her mind racing. She wasn't sure if she was running towards safety or deeper into danger, but she didn't have the strength to stop. Her breath came in shallow bursts, and every sound in the alley seemed amplified. The distant growl of a car engine, the rustle of a trash can, the soft scrape of their shoes against the pavement. Finally, they reached a small nondescript van parked by the alley's end. Kyle stopped abruptly, turning to face Sarah. "Get in," he ordered. The van seemed harmless enough, but Sarah couldn't shake the nagging feeling in her gut. Her instincts screamed at her to turn away, but she knew she had no choice. Sarah climbed into the van, her body still stiff from the adrenaline. As she sat down, Kyle slammed the door shut, and the engine roared to life. The van jolted forward, cutting through the quiet night as they sped down the narrow street. Sarah glanced over at Kyle, who was gripping the wheel tightly, his knuckles white. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kyle's eyes flicked to her for a moment before he returned his gaze to the road. "Somewhere safe," he replied, his voice steady but strained. The city outside the van's windows blurred as they sped through darkened streets, the occasional streetlight casting fleeting glows on the van's surface. The further they drove, the more isolated they became, the tension between them mounting with each passing moment. Sarah's mind raced. What was Kyle not telling her? And who was after her? She couldn't keep running forever. After what felt like an eternity, the van finally came to a halt in front of an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. Sarah's heart pounded as she glanced at Kyle. He didn't speak as he killed the engine and opened the door. "Get out," he said, his voice firm. Reluctantly, Sarah stepped out of the van, her legs unsteady as she followed Kyle toward the entrance of the warehouse. The building loomed ahead, dark and foreboding, its broken windows and rusted metal doors adding to its menacing appearance. As they entered, the air inside was thick with dust, the faint smell of mold and decay clinging to the walls. The emptiness of the warehouse felt suffocating. Kyle led Sarah further into the shadows, where a dim light flickered above. "We'll be safe here for now," Kyle said, though his tone lacked conviction. Sarah felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Something wasn't right. The warehouse was silent, save for the faint sound of Sarah's breathing. She stood in the center of the cold, dusty space, her heart racing. Kyle had led her inside, but now he seemed distant, his eyes fixed on something unseen. The light flickered above them, casting strange shadows across the broken floorboards. Sarah's skin crawled as she realized the true emptiness of the place. There were no other signs of life, no employees, no other vehicles. The more she looked around, the more it felt like a trap. Kyle turned to her, his face set in an unreadable mask. "We'll be safe here," he repeated, but his voice lacked the conviction it had earlier. Something was off. She wanted to believe him, but the unease gnawing at her refused to let go. Who was he really protecting her from? And more importantly, why had he brought her here? A loud bang echoed from the far corner of the warehouse, making Sarah jump. She spun around, her eyes wide, heart pounding. Kyle's hand shot up in a calming gesture. "It's nothing," he said quickly, though his voice seemed strained. "Just a rat or something." But Sarah didn't believe him. She'd heard that noise too clearly, too distinctly. There was something else in the warehouse. Something, or someone, was waiting in the shadows. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but she was trapped. The entrance had been left behind them, and now the only way forward was deeper into the unknown. As she glanced at Kyle again, she noticed the flicker of something in his eyes, fear perhaps, or maybe guilt. She couldn't tell. She took a slow, cautious step forward, her mind racing with possibilities. But she had no choice. She had to find out what was really happening. Kyle moved forward, his steps slow as though he was trying to hide his own fear. Sarah followed, her body tense, every muscle on alert. She felt like a mouse caught in a trap, her senses heightened with every footstep she took. The further they ventured into the warehouse, the darker it became. The air grew colder, and the faint sounds of movement grew louder. She could hear it now too. The soft scraping of metal, the shuffle of footsteps. Someone was definitely here, and it wasn't just Kyle. Sarah's stomach twisted. Who else was in the warehouse? And why had Kyle brought her here? The thought gnawed at her. Kyle finally stopped at a small office area, tucked behind stacks of crates. He turned to face her. "Stay here," he said sharply, his tone colder than she'd ever heard it. "Don't move. I'll handle this." Sarah's heart sank. She didn't want to be left alone, but she didn't have a choice. Kyle had already started walking away, disappearing into the shadows. Sarah stood there, alone in the eerie silence, as the minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The only sound was the distant shuffle of footsteps and the occasional creak of the building's old bones. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Kyle had disappeared into the shadows, but his sudden coldness only deepened her fear. What was he hiding? Why had he kept so much from her? The door to the office creaked open, and Sarah tensed, her pulse quickening. She wasn't sure what she expected to see, but it certainly wasn't the sight before her. In the dim light of the office, Kyle stood with his back to her, speaking to a figure Sarah couldn't make out. She heard the low murmur of voices, but the words were indistinct. Then the figure moved into the light, and Sarah's heart froze. It was Jake. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she stepped forward, her mind racing. "Jake," she whispered, barely able to believe what she was seeing. He was standing there, alive, and looking as though he had never been gone. His eyes, cold and calculating, met hers. "Surprised?" he asked, his voice low, almost mocking. Sarah's knees felt weak, and she took an involuntary step back. She had so many questions, but none of them seemed to form. How? Why? She looked at Kyle, who avoided her gaze, his expression unreadable. "What's going on?" Sarah demanded, her voice shaky with disbelief. Jake stepped forward, a faint smile curling on his lips. "I'm the one who's been watching you, Sarah," he said softly. "And now, it's your turn to listen." Her heart pounded in her chest as Jake's words sank in. He wasn't just back, he was here for a reason, and she had just become part of a much darker game. Sarah's world spun as Jake's words hung in the air. He was standing there, so calm, so collected, as though nothing had ever happened. The shock of seeing him alive was too much to comprehend. She wanted to scream, to run, but her body refused to obey. "Why, Jake? Why do this?" she whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. He smirked, as if she were asking the most obvious question. "It's not about why, Sarah. It's about what you'll do next." His words hit her like a punch to the gut. She wanted to shout, to demand answers, but the terror in her chest made her speechless. Kyle stepped forward, but Sarah stopped him with a look. "I trusted you," she said, her voice thick with hurt. Kyle's gaze shifted, regret in his eyes. "You should have never gotten involved," he said quietly. "None of this was ever meant for you." The coldness in his words was more painful than anything Jake had said. Jake took a slow step toward her, his eyes never leaving hers. "You think you understand what's happening here, Sarah, but you don't," he said, his voice dripping with a sinister calm. "You're just a pawn in a game you don't even know the rules to." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She couldn't comprehend his words, not yet. But she could feel the truth in them. There was something far darker at play here, and she had been blind to it all along. "I don't care what game you think you're playing," Sarah said, her voice shaky but determined. "I won't be a part of it." Jake's smile faded, replaced by a look of cold fury. "You don't have a choice," he spat. "You're already involved, Sarah. And now, you'll see how deep this goes." His words chilled her to the bone. This wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about something far worse. The tension in the warehouse was unbearable. The air was thick with unspoken threats, and Sarah's mind raced as she struggled to understand everything that had led to this moment. "What is it you want, Jake?" she demanded, her voice stronger now, as her fear began to give way to anger. Jake's lips curled into a sneer, and he took another step toward her. "I want you to see the truth, Sarah," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "I want you to understand that you were never meant to escape." Sarah shook her head, unable to grasp his meaning. "What are you talking about? Why bring me into this?" she asked, her words barely a whisper. Jake's eyes glinted with cruel amusement. "Because you're the key, Sarah. You always were." The shock of his words hit her like a wave. The key? She was the one who had been used all along, a pawn in a game she hadn't understood. Sarah's mind was reeling, trying to process Jake's words. She couldn't understand what he meant by being the key. Before she could speak, Kyle finally moved, stepping between her and Jake. "Stop, Jake. She doesn't need to know any of this," he said, his voice tight with urgency. Jake's laugh echoed through the warehouse, hollow and cruel. "You still don't get it, do you, Kyle? She's already in this far deeper than you realize." Sarah's pulse quickened. "Tell me what you mean, Jake," she shouted. Jake's smile faded, and for the first time there was something darker in his eyes. "You think you're safe now, don't you? You think you've escaped all of this. But the truth is, Sarah, you're already dead." The words hit her like a blow to the chest. Her body trembled, the gravity of his statement sinking in. "Dead?" Sarah stumbled back, the weight of Jake's words crashing down on her. "Dead? What did he mean?" She looked to Kyle for answers, but he remained silent, his face twisted in regret. "Kyle, please," Sarah begged, her voice breaking. "What is he talking about?" Kyle took a deep breath, then turned to face her, his eyes filled with sorrow. "It's true, Sarah," he said quietly. "You've been involved in something much bigger than you realize. This wasn't just about survival. It was about power, control." Sarah's knees buckled, and she fell to the ground, the reality of the situation settling in. "No," she whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. "No, this can't be true." But Kyle's silence was all the confirmation she needed. "You were the key to all of this," Jake said, his voice low and satisfied. "And now, it's time for you to pay the price." Sarah's world crumbled as everything she thought she knew slipped through her fingers. There was no escape from this.